Hello, Todd Dunn here on April 7, 2019. Today I'm just going to do a short video about an important component on your boat. Now, if you have inboard power and an inboard rudder, you probably have two of these. And what I'm talking about is the stuffing box or packing box, as it's called. And basically what this is a seal that your rudder shaft or propeller shaft passes through that allows the shaft to turn but keeps water out of the boat. Now I just happen to have an old stuffing box handy, and I'm going to walk through how the thing works and how to service it, which it does need periodically. Okay, let's take a look at it. Here is a stuffing box on a simulated propeller shaft, which is a handle of a hoe. I didn't happen to have a propeller shaft handy at home. This stuffing box is off of my sailboat, and I took it off when it was 42 years old. And it's currently 47 years old, but this is what a stuffing box looks like. And it has three parts. It has the body of the stuffing box here, the main packing nut here, and a jam nut there. This is made out of bronze, and what you want to do to service this is you want to get yourself a couple of wrenches. I just happen to have a pipe wrench and a pair of slip lock pliers that are big enough here, and you're going to want to loosen up the jam nut. You do that by putting your pipe wrench on there. Take your slip locks or another pipe wrench, put it on here, and just back this jam nut off until you can turn it. I didn't have this very tight. And just back it off a few turns, like this. And I usually go, 4 or 5 threads to give myself some room. And then you can undo the jam nut just by turning it the other and slide it up the shaft a little bit. As far as you can. Now this is your propeller shaft. You're going to hit the propeller shaft coupling, and you're probably not going to have a lot of room in there. Then you need a piece of wire or a special tool to reach up in here and hook the packing and pull it out. And it's usually much more difficult than that. I'm just using simulated packing, some nylon rope that I had handy to make packing. And you just work at that, pulling the packing out, scraping it out of there until you get all the packing out. Now the packing comes in a number of varieties. One variety is flax that's impregnated with wax, and there are also synthetic packings made out of a variety of materials and some of them have Teflon embedded in them. And the idea of this is you're going to put your packing in the stuffing box and tighten the stuffing box up, which compresses the packing around the shaft, and you tighten it up to the point where no more water is coming in when the shaft is stationary, but when the shaft is turning, it drips every few seconds. One drip. Now to put your material on there, you take your packing, wrap it around the shaft like this, and then use your knife to cut off a length that just goes around the shaft. Just like that. I won't show you the whole process. Anyway, once you've cut off 3 pieces of packing that wrap around the shaft, you can see these go around the shaft and meet there, like that. You're ready to repack your stuffing box. And this is a fairly simple procedure. Now, some people cut the ends of the packing diagonally, but you don't have to do that. what you can do instead is simply stagger where the pieces of packing meet. And you take a piece of packing like this, wrap it around, and you can take another one like that and wrap it around, and you want to put at least 3 on here. And then take the jam nut, slide it over the packing, and screw it on, which will compress the packing inside the jam nut around the shaft. Now this doesn't fit properly, but you just screw it on, and that'll push the packing up into the nut. And once you get it in there firmly, now I've put 2 pieces in, and we screw it in there until it's snug and it's pushed the packing all the way up in the nut. And we can back it off and put our 3rd piece in. And remember, you want to stagger the joint in the packing so that it doesn't just line up all the way straight through, or it will cause a much worse leak. So I'll put this one on with the joint on the side there. And once you've got at least 3 pieces of packing in there, you screw this on until it's nice and snug. And when it snugs up, you tighten it up. If you're in the water, you tighten it up until it's no longer leaking. And maybe go another half turn or turn. And then you take your jam nut, snug it up against there by hand, put your wrenches on, and tighten the 2 nuts together so that they won't unscrew. Remember, the propeller shaft or rudder shaft is turning in here, and if you don't have this jam nut tight, you can simply cause that packing nut to back off. And the way this works is simple. This packing, which is wrapped around the shaft and pushed up into the jam nut, compresses around the shaft when you tighten the nut and stops water leaking in. The idea is to have it tight enough that there isn't any significant water leaking in, but you can still turn the shaft relatively easily. There'll be some resistance. Now you can do this in the water, although a lot of water is going to come in around the shaft when you've got the packing nut backed off. You can slow it down by putting some cotton or some sort of cloth in there if you have room, or you can just live with it and let your bilge pumps keep up with it. You can also do it out of the water. It's a little trickier finding out just how tight to get it, but what I recommend is snug it up until you can just barely turn the shaft by hand. Give it another half turn or so, and but make sure you can then still turn the shaft with a wrench and tighten up the jam nut. Once the boat's back in the water, you can make your final adjustment. Okay, so that's a packing box. Now, before we finish, I want to talk about a couple of other details. A packing box has 3 significant dimensions. The first is the shaft diameter. So if you're buying a new packing box, you need to know your shaft diameter, rudder or propeller shaft. The second dimension is the diameter of the hose. Now these packing boxes are held onto your shaft tube by a short piece of very heavy duty rubber hose that is clamped onto the packing box and the shaft tube with 2 large heavy hose clamps at each end, and they're snugged up nice and tight. And so you need to know the hose diameter, inside diameter, which is the diameter of the packing box here, and also the diameter of the stern tube. They should be the same. And finally, you need to know the size of the packing flax that you're using. And every packing box has slightly different size. So when you pull the old flax out, you're going to want to keep a piece of it so you can measure it. Depending on your shaft diameter, your packing flax is typically going to be about a 1/4 inch if you have a 1-inch shaft. If you have a 1 1/4 inch shaft, it's probably going to also be a 1/4 inch. And as you go up to bigger shaft diameters, it can go up to as much as 3/8 of an inch. But for most sailboats, you're probably looking at 3/16 to 1/4 inch packing material. But as I said, what you want to do is take some out, take out at least one piece, and measure it. And then you can snug the packing box back up with one ring of flax removed and go buy the appropriate size if you don't have it on hand. Okay, so I'll take this guy apart again. There we go. Now they make custom packing box wrenches that are quite expensive, and but you don't actually need them. A pipe wrench and a pair of slip lock pliers like I have here will work, but a custom wrench is a little bit easier to use if you have the money to buy it, or even 2 pipe wrenches will work. I would just back this off, and usually you don't have a lot of room to back it off, and we'll reach up in here with my tool and pull out the flax. There's 1 ring, 2 rings. It's coming out pretty easy because this is just a piece of rope that I cut because I didn't have any packing handy at home. So that's how a packing box works. It's easy. The advantage of these over a dripless seal is, unless your hose shears off, which I suppose could happen but doesn't happen very often, this cannot fail catastrophically. It may leak a little more, and if it's leaking a little more, you can simply tighten the packing back off the lock nut and tighten the packing nut up a little bit to compress the packing a little bit more and get rid of the leak. So let's take a look. Here's the inside of the packing nut, and the packing sits against this flange inside the nut. And when you tighten the nut, it compresses it against the body of the packing box and squeezes it tight around the shaft. So that's all there is to it. Easy to adjust, easy to repack. The hard part is pulling the old packing out, because it gets quite hard over time and can be quite tricky to pull out of there while this is still on the shaft. Anyway, that's a packing box. That's how it works. And that's basically all there is to it. It is a bronze casting, so they're a little expensive if you for some reason think you need to replace it. They cost in the United States somewhere between about $100 and $200 depending on the size. But as I said, this one is currently 47 years old, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I replaced it only because I was doing a cosmetic refit of my engine bay, and I wanted nice, pretty, shiny bronze in there, and I had some extra money lying around, so I just bought a new one and put it on rather than going to the trouble of cleaning this up. As I said, this one may look a little rough, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Okay, that's it. That's how you deal with the stuffing box on your propeller shaft or your rudder shaft. Before I go, I should say that there is another kind of shaft seal, and that is a seal that has a rubber bellows in place of the hose that clamps onto the seal and onto the stern tube or rudder tube, and on the face there is a carbon disc, and then on the shaft, this will simulate it, there's a stainless steel collar with a very smooth face that slides onto up against the carbon disc, and you push it to compress the bellows a little bit, and then tighten up some set screws in the stainless steel collar. And that is what's called a dripless seal, and it works by having the stainless steel collar rotate on the carbon bearing surface, which makes a nice smooth surface and doesn't leak significantly. But the bellows do wear out over time, as does the carbon face, and these are that kind of dripless shaft seal is a maintenance item that probably needs to be replaced around every 10 years, depending on how much you use your boat. More frequently if you use your boat a lot, motor a lot. Less frequently if you don't use your boat so much. And unfortunately, to replace one of these, you either have to pull the shaft out of the boat, or if you can't do that because of the way your boat is set up, you'll have to pull the engine so that you have room to get the dripless shaft seal off of the shaft. That also applies to a traditional stuffing box like this one. But these last essentially forever. This one is 47 years old. I took it out when it was 42 years old. Didn't need to. The hose was the original hose. It was in kind of rough shape, but not causing any problems. It was still nice and rigid. So it's something that you might want to consider. A traditional stuffing box like this is much more of a fail-safe than a dripless seal. It does have the disadvantage that with traditional flax packing, when you're running your engine or turning your rudder back and forth, it will let in a little bit of water. But if you use the Teflon impregnated synthetic packing, you can snug those up so that they don't leak and at all when the shaft is turning, and they don't let in any water. And as I said, if you do start to leak a little more than you want, all you have to do is back off the jam nut and tighten up the packing nut a little bit to compress the packing around the shaft. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit about this fundamental, important component on your boat. And if you did, please click the like button, and I'd also appreciate it if you haven't, that you would subscribe to my channel so you'll get notifications about future posts on this sort of boat stuff or any of the other many things that I make videos about.